All right. Wow. Very full here. I'll try to make it reasonably entertaining so that you poor people that are standing in the back won't be too bored. Thank you all for coming. My name is Greg Neagle. I work for Walt Disney Animation Studios. I'm a senior systems engineer. And today I want to talk about preference management with profiles. So my title, Senior Systems Engineer, and I would imagine that, in this room, most of us kind of have a vague idea what a title like that means. My wife does not understand what I do for a living. I've tried to explain it many times. She'll meet people and they'll get talking and they'll talk about me and, oh, what's your husband do for a living? Oh, he works at Disney. Wow, that's really cool. What's he do at Disney? So she just says, he sells churros at a cart by the Matterhorn. Because it's just really much easier for people to understand. But what I do is I manage Macs. And probably if you're at this conference, that's probably part of what you do as well, is you manage Macs. But what does that mean, right? And management is kind of a vague concept, and you could mean a lot of things. You could mean that you're managing hardware. You specify what's going to be purchased, and you purchase it, and you install it. You got to figure out the life cycle of the machine. What do you do with the old machines? Do you recycle them? Do you give them to schools? Do you retire them? What do you do with all the boxes, when you are unpacking the stuff? Are any of those people in this room today? Because this really looks like EDU kind of hijinks, right? No? You might mean that you manage software, that you purchase the software, you figure out how to install it, how to configure it, how do you keep it up to date, how do you know that you've purchased enough licenses or not enough licenses, all that sort of thing. And you might be talking, when you talk about management, you might talk about managing the configuration of your Mac. Do you use local accounts? Do you use network accounts? Do you use mobile accounts? How do you configure access to file shares and Wi-Fi and 802.1x? VPN setup. Do your users get admin rights on their accounts? Do you help them with the initial setup of applications? Do you turn on File Vault for them? Or do you have them do it? How much of that do you manage? How much of that do you not manage? That's what we're going to talk about today, is tools to help you manage configuration on your Macs. So let's start with a trip back to memory lane, how we did it in the old days, hopeless hackery. And hopefully this is an evolution of what not to do and maybe what to do, but this is what I did. So let's go back to about 2002. OS X was relatively new. We were supporting it in our organization. We had a lot of Unix users, so we already had NFS home directories. We already had LDAP directory services. We had a lot of infrastructure that we wanted to leverage. But we also needed to enforce the screensaver on the machines after 10 minutes, and that it required a password, because we didn't want people to just walk up to any desk and get access to all of our show data, which was basically wide open on NFS shares. So the machine itself had to be reasonably secure. But because we were using NFS network homes, there weren't any local homes to modify. So tricks like this, a lot of people do this thing where they modify the system library user template so that when new user accounts are created, certain preferences are just already there. Well, our homes already existed. They were out on the NFS shares. So this thing was never consulted at the time there was a time a user was created. So I had to look for some way I could influence the configuration of the screensaver without dealing with these network homes. And I dug around inside places that Apple would not have you dig around any longer. And I found this file inside the System Library Framework Screensaver framework that seemed to be the defaults, in other words, the very default settings for the screensaver. And it looked like this. And this is the old next step preferences file format. It's also what, if you've ever used the defaults command, that's what you see when you read a preferences file. It looks like this. And so so by default, the screensaver would come on after 20 minutes, and it used the Flurry screensaver. That's that weird fireworky thing, but it would not ask for a password. Well, I found that I could replace that file with something like this, and this is now the more modern plist format. The OS didn't really care. I probably could have written it in either format, and the OS would have been fine. But here I've set the password so that it will ask for the password. I've reduced the idle time to 600 seconds, which is 10 minutes. And I changed the actual screensaver that was going to display to the computer name, because it was really nice to be able to walk into an office or into a room and immediately see the name of that computer displayed very large on the screen. It wasn't absolutely necessary to do, but it was a nice touch. The great thing about this is then, when new users logged in for the very first time, there were no preferences set up yet for the screensaver, so it would use the OS's default preferences, the ones that I had changed. So now all those users, by default, would have a screensaver that required a password that came on after 10 minutes. That's what we needed. Unfortunately, they could also change those settings anytime that they wanted to. All they had to do is go to the system preferences and change them. So I had to do one more nasty hack. I removed access from that pane, right? We didn't know any better back then. That's what we did. We just hacked around until we had a solution. So all I did is I took, if you understand Unix permissions, I took away the read and execute rights for the preferences pane for non-admin users by doing that. So they would get our desired defaults for the screensaver, and they had really no obvious way to change them. So we pretty much got what we wanted. Problem then, of course, was anytime there was an OS update, did we have to check this? Probably, because it's possible Apple would have replaced this file. So it wasn't, it had some rough edges. But even then, I knew there was a better way to do this. I just couldn't quite wrap my head around how to manage it. So if you're familiar with how OS X manages preferences, there are commands you can use, especially command line tools like the command defaults, which you can use to manage preferences. And for example, for those same things that we were trying to do for the screensaver, I can run a defaults command that sets ask for password and sets the idle time. So those commands would actually do the thing that I wanted. But that affects only the current user. So to use that effectively to manage all the users, I would have to have some way to run those commands for every user as that user. So the first step I would do is I took those commands and I put them into a script. And this is a really, really fancy script, right? That's the first step of scripting, is the stuff that you type manually into the command line, just cut and paste it into a file, and that's the beginning of your script. So I wrote this script, and this would do the stuff that we needed. And then I had to figure out, how do I get this to run for every user as that user? And even back then in 10.1, 10.2, Apple supported this mechanism, excuse me, this mechanism that allowed something to run at login. Now, confusingly, originally they called it startup items, but it really was something that ran at login. And it was designed to launch an application, like, oh, I need to have iTunes open when I log in, so you could add it to this login items preferences pane, and they would open. And I wondered, could I use this mechanism to do what I wanted? Now, this is designed to launch an application, not just run an arbitrary script. So I had to make another piece. So I built an AppleScript application. Everybody's fun with AppleScript, right? It's just a great tool. But it's what I knew at the time. So I wrote this AppleScript app, and I wanted this to be a little bit more generic. So instead of telling it to run a single script, I set it up so that it looked in a folder, and it would run any script it found inside that folder. So that way later, if there were more preferences I wanted to set, I would just write a new script, drop it in that folder, and I wouldn't have to change this application. So now I need to get this application to launch for every user. So doesn't that really push the problem? How do I change the preferences of the login window so that it will launch this app for every user? Well, it turns out that there is a root level library preferences login window plist, and if you added things to that plist, they would take effect for every user on the machine. So I really only had to change one file on the machine to get my application to run for every user on the machine. So we pretty much have all the pieces here. So we have the login window, and it reads our plist at library preferences login window plist, and it tells it to run our AppleScript app at login. So our AppleScript then looks inside the folder for our scripts, and then it runs the script, which calls the defaults command, and the defaults command then sets our screensaver. Right? I mean, really, what possibly could go wrong with that? It's brilliant. It's genius. Why wouldn't you do this? And even after we've done all of those things to get the default set the way we want, we still have to do this nasty hack to prevent people from changing our defaults. So it's clear that this isn't enough, that we still need a better way. We need a way to manage the preferences in a way that they're truly managed, that at least we have the ability to lock them down so that the user can't change them. Which brings us to MCX. So around the time that 10.2 shipped, macOS 10 server, Apple introduced a technology called MCX. What does MCX stand for? Some Apple people will tell you it stands for Managed Client OS 10, but I've never seen any actual printed documentation of that. With OS 10 server was a new tool called Workgroup Manager. And Workgroup Manager was a tool you could use to edit things in the directory services that shipped with OS 10 server. So you could add users and accounts and that sort of thing. But one of the additional features it had is you could manage preferences for those users, groups, machines, and machine groups. So you could pick a computer, for example, decide to manage the preferences, and say I wanted to manage the login window preferences for a computer. And I could then set it so that a login window showed just the fields for username and password instead of pictures. And when they were managed via MCX, the user could not change them because those options were grayed out in the interface. You'll notice even that the padlock is unlocked here at the bottom, but those options are still not available for me to change. So this was great. We had an Apple-supported way to manage preferences, enforce them. We didn't have to hack around. We didn't have to write scripts. We had a nice little GUI we could use. But there was a catch. To do it, the way Apple wanted you to do it is you had to implement their directory service, Open Directory. And perfectly fine directory service. You could put those management pieces, the managed preferences, in other directory services. You could put them in Windows Active Directory. You could put them into an OpenLDAP directory. But for Active Directory, you had to extend the schema. And at least back then, it was really difficult to undo schema changes. So Active Directory administrators were very, very reluctant to make changes to their directory to add some management stuff for those stupid Macs that you keep annoying them with. And more importantly, they really wanted to not make changes that were not supported by Microsoft. So a lot of organizations did not want to do schema modifications to Active Directory. So some other people came up with this thing called Golden Triangle, and that's where you took Active Directory and Open Directory, and your clients talked to both of them so that you could have your users and groups in Active Directory and your managed preferences over here in Open Directory. And that had its own set of problems, and obviously it's fairly complex to set up, and just complex enough for me to describe. But if you had a very large Active Directory infrastructure, it was difficult to scale the Open Directory infrastructure to match. You're running two directory systems. Your server people still are unhappy because you've put Apple hardware in their server room. So again, many organizations decided they could not use MCX because they just had no way to deploy it without doing things they weren't comfortable with. When OS 10.5 Leopard shipped, Apple changed, this was when they switched over from NetInfo to using Open Directory on the client. And instead of this weird Berkeley database storing users and groups and that sort of thing, they were just flat files sitting on your machine. And they're there to this day. If you look in vardb dslocal, that's your local directory service. And so several of us started playing around with the idea of pointing the Workgroup Manager application at that local directory service running on each machine. And we found that we could create computer groups, computer objects, and we could add management pieces to those. We could actually put MCX data on local objects inside the directory services. And since these are just files in a directory, we could then push out MCX settings to machines simply by installing files. So if we had a way to get files out onto the machines that we managed, we could use MCX. So this opened up the use of MCX to people that weren't able to use it before because they weren't able to use the directory services. If they could find a way to get those files out onto their machines, and ARD, SSH, anything that could install, Casper, FileWave, anything that could install files, you could install MCX on your machines. And I'm going to plug a book that I wrote 5 years ago about this. Don't buy it. It's so out of date. But there's still there. If you are interested in learning more about local MCX for whatever reason, it's actually many dead trees were sacrificed to record it for posterity. So all this was happening on the Mac, but Apple was working on other things. In 2007, they introduced the iPhone. And the iPhone proved incredibly popular, and it became very much used in large organizations. And those organizations asked Apple, we need ways to help configure these things. And Apple introduced a technology called configuration profiles to help manage iOS devices. You would use a tool like iPhone Configuration Utility, and you would build a configuration profile, which turned out to be just a simple text file. And then it would have inside it the management data that you wanted for that device. You could then take those configuration profiles and email them to users or make them available on a web portal, and your users could just tap something, and then that configuration profile would be installed on their device, and they would have access to your mail or your VPN or your 802.1x network. That was really great. And then some more vendors and Apple developed something called MDM, which then allowed you to push those configuration profiles to your managed devices. So let's get back to the Mac. When Apple introduced 10.7 Lion, they brought many of the features that they had developed for iOS back to the Mac, and one of those was support for configuration profiles. So you could now use the same management tools to manage iOS devices and Macs. What are configuration profiles? Well, I said before, they're just a text file. Specifically, they're p-lists. When you install one, like if you were to double-click on a configuration profile, the Profiles Preferences pane opens, the users walk through what they need to do to install it, and it shows up in the Profiles Preferences pane as a managed setting. There's another tool, a command line tool, user bin profiles, and this allows you to install and remove profiles. You can also get information on what profiles are installed. This is very useful. We'll get to this in a moment. What can configuration profiles do? Apple has built in support to manage a lot of different settings using configuration profiles. You can see at least a subset of them here. But there's sort of a catch-all here in the bottom, this custom settings. You can use that thing to manage virtually any piece of software that uses standard Mac OS defaults or Mac OS preferences files. Just like Workgroup Manager allowed you to import a preference file to manage those custom things, the Profile Manager, which is part of OS X Server now, allows you to do the same thing. You can import a preference file from a random application, and you can then manage that with a configuration profile. How do you create configuration profiles? One really easy and effective way is to use Profile Manager. And you're immediately thinking, Profile Manager. Isn't that part of OS X Server? Yes. Didn't we try to get rid of OS X Server in our organization? Yes. So I don't want to run Profile Manager. That's no good. Well, you don't have to run it in production. You could install a VM on your machine, install server on that, and then use Profile Manager in a VM for nothing other than generating configuration profiles. You don't have to use it to deploy them. Just use it as a GUI for generating configuration profiles. I'll show you that in a little while. So with the Profile Manager GUI, you can create a profile containing the settings you want to manage. You'd save that profile, you'd download it. I always forget to click that save button. If you don't click that, the download button doesn't work. Once you download it, it's just a file on your machine, and then you open it up in your text editor, and then you're extremely annoyed. For whatever reason, the plists that Profile Manager generates have no line breaks. Everything is one long line that goes out into infinity. But we can fix that. We can use plutil to convert it to XML1, which it already is XML1, but as a side effect, it puts those line breaks back in. And then we can take a look at it and see, okay, I understand what's going on here. Here are the things that are being managed in this configuration profile. And we can even edit this, make changes. So you could use Profile Manager as your starting point, but then continue to edit in a text editor. Another tool you can use is called mcxTo Profile. And it was developed by a man named Tim Sutton from Canada. It's available out on GitHub. I'll have all these links available for you. You don't need to take notes right now if you don't want to, and the slides will also be available. So mcxTo Profile is really a simple tool for making configuration profiles from existing preferences files or existing MCX records. You can point it at a preferences file. You can point it at an MCX record, either in local MCX or out on a directory server. And this is actually the way I ended up converting a lot of our existing local MCX into configuration profiles when we made that migration, is I used mcxTo Profile to convert each of those local MCX objects into a configuration profile. So let's do a quick demo. That is Moana, our film for later this year. All right. So I'm going to, let me launch an app. Let's do Text Wrangler. What I'm interested in doing, not Wrangler. What I'm interested in doing, let's see which screen Text Wrangler pops up on. That's good enough. I want to turn off automatic updates. I'm going to manage those via Monkey. I don't want my users bugged with a screen that's talking about updates. So I'll turn it off manually in the preferences. And we'll quit Text Wrangler. And I happen to know that preferences is com.barebones.text Wrangler. So that's the preferences. There's a lot of stuff there. We're going to have some fun with that here in a minute. So I can use mcxTo Profile to convert that into a configuration profile. Everybody see? And then I give it a path to the plist, but I also have to give it sort of an identifier, which is a unique name. Actually, let's call this edu.psu.mac.demo. PSU man, that's nice. Demo text wrangler. Good enough. So that's a unique identifier. We'll talk about why you need those in a little while. And I did something wrong. Did I spell identifier wrong? Is that what I did? Identifier. Bing. And of course, it opened on the other monitor. Where is, there we go. So here's the mobile config file it created. And I could take a look at that in a text editor. And ironically, I'm not going to use text wrangler. Oh, it's edu. Duh. Bring that over from the other window. Come on. There's a lot of cruft in this thing. Let's see, we got 8,000 lines here, more than 8,000 lines here. And all I wanted to do was manage the software update settings. So I have to do some editing here, right? I happen to know, since I've cheated and done this demo a few times, that what I'm actually looking for starts with SU in terms of, so I'm going to look for that. Oh boy, we're going to find that a bunch of times, right? Because look at all these data, these fun data things. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this is going to take a while. So let's do that's probably enough, but we'll do that. Bing. Okay, so now we see we've got a few things here. SU, which stands for software update probably. SU automatically update, false. SU enable automatic checks, false. SU last check time, last check date. SU software update enabled. I don't know what all of these do. I'm guessing here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything, all the keys and values after that, because I'm not interested in them. I'm going to select all of those, and we're going to watch this scroll for a while. In fact, let's do this a different way. All right. There, we got all the way to the end. So that's gone. And then let's, oh, better get rid of that extra dead line there. And then we'll do the same thing here. Two-handed scrolling. And roll all the way to the front of that. So this is why we get paid the big bucks, right? To go through these text files and edit them. All right, so now I've cut all this out, all the stuff I'm not interested in. I probably don't want those dates. I don't want to enforce the dates that this thing was last done, but I do want to turn everything else off. So I'm going to take these dates out of here too, the time and the date. So I'm left with 3 settings. They seem like they all do the same thing. I don't know why they're all there. I'm going to leave them there. So automatically update, enable automatic checks, software update enabled. So that's the entire plist now, and I could just install it by double-clicking it, and it asks me if I want to install that. I'm not going to right now, but that's how you would create a basic configuration profile using mcx to profile. All right. Another way to get configuration profiles is to steal them. There's a lot of them out there on GitHub. Again, a lot of these URLs will be available later, as part of the slides, or I'll give you a link to them. But you might be able to use some of these configuration profiles as is, or you might just use them as sort of examples that you can edit and change for your own needs, or as a learning tool. But there's a lot of them out there that you can grab. And that's another great thing about them simply being text files, is they're really easy to share. Let's dig a little bit into a profile and look at the anatomy of it a bit. I kind of glossed over that as I was editing it, and we'll look at these contents a little bit more in depth here. So this is a complete configuration profile that manages the desktop picture. Every profile you use should have a consistent payload identifier. That was that identifier that I used when I was creating something with mcxTo profile. That's the one consistent name that should move forward with this profile forever. So if I make changes to the profile later, I want to change what it's managing slightly or change something, keep the profile identifier the same. That's how the OS tracks that set of settings. This profile is designed to be installed as a system-level profile, meaning it manages the device or all users on the device, not a specific user. And this value is actually paid attention to when you're double-clicking a profile to install it. So if you set something as a system-level profile, it'll probably also ask for admin rights to install because it's installing at the device level. Certain types of profiles make more sense as user-level profiles, like if you're trying to set up somebody's email for them or their calendar, that sort of thing. That's not something that would apply for the device as a whole. It would apply for a single user. You'll see something that looks like you could use. It's a payload version key, but that's not for our use. What the payload version key is, it defines the version of the payload format. So it's used by the profiles mechanism to read this file. You should not use this. Like, let's say you created a version of this profile and then you change it later. Don't bump the version to 2, because that will break it. That's not for your use of keeping track of the profile. That's for Apple's use, so it knows how to read theseplists. Leave that value alone. And a few of the other keys in here that we'll look at relate to what your users might see. There's a display name, a description, the name of your organization. This might be helpful to reassure your users that this configuration profile that they see actually comes from you and not something random. Notice next to this there's a scary unsigned warning. It is possible to sign configuration profiles so they don't have that scary warning. I'm not going to cover that today because it's boring, but it is possible to do. And finally, the meat of the payload, or the meat of the profile, is the payload, the stuff that it's actually doing, the stuff that it's actually managing. And this particular profile sets the desktop picture to a nice, boring, corporate standard gray. The payload type is com.apple.desktop, so that's an internal thing that Apple, it basically is telling the profile mechanism what code to use. And so Apple has something for managing the desktop, and they really have a lot of different things for managing stuff, and they add more with each OS release. The one in the lower right, com.apple.manage client preferences, that's what you will see when you manage preferences that you import, or if you use mcxTo profile, and it really corresponds to the old MCX style management. All the other stuff is very profile specific. So you have profiles, you've created them, so your next challenge is how do you get them out to the machines you manage? How do you deploy these profiles? Well, you could just email them to users. You could put them up on a web server that they can download them and double click. That can work for user level preferences, or if you want, you've got a bring your own device set up and you need them to be able to configure VPN or 802.1x. If they can get to your web portal, they can download that stuff. Another way I've used profiles is to generate them on the fly and install them. So we have a little application I wrote called the Disney Animation Setup Assistant, and it launches on the first login for any of our new users. And since the users are in LDAP, it pre-populates a bunch of stuff, but we don't know their password. So we do ask them for their password, and then once they confirm that, they choose which applications they would like to have automatically set up for them. And what that mechanism does is it takes that information that we have about them, you know, their username and password and that sort of thing, and some stuff I already know, you know, where our email servers are and that sort of thing. And I, on the fly, create some configuration profiles with that information, and then I install them. And so these configuration profiles show up in their preferences pane. But by running that setup assistant and simply entering their password and hitting configure, email is set up for them, the calendar is set up for them, iChat, or I guess messages.app is set up. All that stuff is set up for them automatically via configuration profiles. I used to do it via scripting in the past, but once I realized configuration profiles would do it and it was Apple supported, I moved to that method. Another way to install configuration profiles on your devices is to enroll your machines in Apple's Profile Manager. And that you can run that on OS X server. You know, stick a Mac Mini in the server closet, hope the server team doesn't notice it. And you can do that. And you can use that to push out new and updated configuration profiles to the enrolled machines. Unless you have a really, really small deployment, I really don't recommend it. Profile Manager doesn't scale very well. It tends to fall over if there's more than a few dozen, maybe a few score devices. If you have more than 100 devices, you're probably not going to want to use Profile Manager at all. I think even Apple has come to the realization that it's more of a demonstration of the technology or a proof of concept, that you shouldn't use it in production. So if you really do want an MDM, you should probably go look at a commercial vendor, and there are a lot out there. Here's a few right now. I think some of these people are even at the conference if you want to talk to them. Or you could use a wider suite of software deployment tools. And again, some of these people are also at the conference. And usually some of their features, besides installing software, is they often have a bundled MDM as well that you can use to manage those preferences. And you might look at this and go, well, why is remote desktop up there? Why is that thing Deploy Studio? Why is that up there? How can I use that to deploy configuration profiles? Well, Tim Sutton to the rescue again. He has a tool called Make Profile Package. And what you can do with that is you can take any configuration profile and turn it into a package. So if you have a tool that can install packages, well, now you have a tool that can install configuration profiles. And we're going to do a really short demo of that one, because it's not that interesting. Where are we? So we'd already created that profile over here, edu PSU Mac demo. I'm going to switch over to the Make Profile. Let's zoom a little bit. So Make Profile Package. So I'm just pointing it to that mobile config that we created a few minutes ago. And boop, 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 it wrote a package. Look, there's our package right there. Double click it. And installer opens on the other monitor. Right? And so I could install the package, which would install the profile. In fact, let's just do that. It's going to ask for nope, that's not going to work. And so now if I peek at System Preferences pane, or Preferences Profiles pane, we will see this guy right here, mcxTo profile com bare bones text wrangler. So I installed a profile by installing a package. And of course, my favorite software deployment software of all time can install profiles. You could use create profile package, because obviously Monkey knows how to install packages, so we could do that. But about 1.5 years ago, we added support, direct support for configuration profiles. You just import them like you would import any other package. So let's look at some examples of what you might want to manage with configuration profiles. So we could manage gatekeeper settings, screensaver, wake from sleep password. You can require file vault be turned on. You can restrict access to preferences panes. You can manage the login window settings. You can cause mobile accounts to be created at login. You can point your clients to an internal software update server. And any arbitrary application that uses standard Mac OS X preferences, you can also do at least some management with configuration profiles. So you could import a preferences file. So what we could do here is, let's say we are interested in managing Safari's homepage. So we would click that little upload file button. We would choose the Safari's preferences plist. Let's say I'd already set the homepage for myself to what I want it to be. And like when we imported, when we used mcx to profile, and we saw all those extra settings that we didn't want for bare bones, we're going to get the same thing for Safari. You get all of the settings that are in that preferences file. So then you get the very fun task of going through and deleting all of the stuff you don't want, which could take you a really, really long time, because there's lots of stuff there. But eventually you're down to the one thing you want to manage, which is the home page. Again, this might be faster if you were to export it and use a text editor, because you can select a big chunk of stuff at a time and delete it, but whatever. So, another demo. Wake up. Come on. My VM refuses to wake up. It's dead. All right, there we go. Or maybe not. There we go. All right. Let me move it over to the other monitor, because it's on this one, annoyingly. There we go. All right, so I have Profile Manager running in a VM. And I've created a placeholder called some Mac, because I haven't actually enrolled any physical devices into this Profile Manager, so I just create a placeholder. And I want to, my organization has decreed that creativity on the desktop is not to be tolerated. And you know, instead of lovely background pictures like, you know, El Capitan here, or, you know, I'm creative, I want something else. Let's do, I don't know, what's that? That's actually not that creative. But it's part of my individual expression, but that is not to be allowed. All desktops must have the approved corporate gray background. We do not want distractions, and it must be enforced. All right, well, I'm just the admin. I just work here. So let's see. I'm going to edit here. And I want to add a description here. This manages desktop picture. Boy, can everybody see this? Because I can't. and the profile can't be removed. And then we want to go down to, where are you? Restrictions, there we are. Configure those restrictions. Happens to be under functionality. What I want is lock desktop picture. And this is really annoying. Server 4.0, or maybe it was the version of Safari, I don't know what it was, but the last time I did this demo, I could actually just drag a picture into here like that, and it just popped in the path. Doesn't let me do that anymore. So I'm going to cheat. Instead of having to type the whole dumb thing, well, I'm just going to copy and paste it. But so that's the path to the picture you want to enforce, and that path has to exist on the machines that you're managing. So you don't get to upload a picture into this. It has to be an existing picture on the machine. So if you need a different picture, you'd have to have another package that installed that first. So we're going to lock the desktop picture to boring corporate gray. OK, good. Make sure you click the Save button, otherwise this download button doesn't work. So I'm going to hit Save. And it tells me what the profile's general and restrictions. I can download it. It's in my downloads, but it immediately wants to install it, which I don't want. So I'll just say no thank you. And then if I go to my downloads folder here, there's the profile. Let's take a look at it. Oh, remember what I told you? No line breaks. Silly Apple. So let's reformat that. So goodbye. And let's look at it again. So now we got line breaks and we can actually read this. And all we were interested in was managing the desktop picture, but look at all this stuff. What is all this stuff? Well, it turns out that when you use the Profile Manager, even if all you're interested in is managing a single setting, you get all of the settings that are within a specific pane. So I'm getting all of this, and all of this, and all of this, and this, and this, and this. And I don't want that. So I'm going to have to edit this profile. I'm going to spare you the boring parts of editing it. So I already have one ready to go. Unfortunately, it's on the other monitor. Da-da. All right. Here we go. That guy right there. Oh, I did the wrong thing. I double-clicked it. Don't want that. So I've edited this down. Sorry. I've edited this down so that it really only has what I'm interested in, which is the fact that I've locked the desktop picture payload, and then I've set it to library desktop pictures. Now, I've got the payload. I want to manage it. I want to distribute it to my machines, and I want to make sure that that all of the users suffer and get this desktop. So I'm using Monkey. Cleary. I can just import, not Mooney import, that would be interesting. I can just import that mobile config. Item name, okay, sure, why not? change the display name. Good. I don't care about any of this stuff. Sure. That's fine. Let's import the item. Let's put it in the profiles subdirectory. There it is. Okay, great. Go away. I don't care. Yep, let's rebuild the catalogs. All right, so I've put it in my monkey server. Next, you still around? No, I quit you, so I guess I got to find you again. I need to add it to the manifest for this machine. No, I don't want to get on your AT&T Wi-Fi. So let's see, I'm going to go into my site default manifest that I'm using for this machine. Oh, see, that's a leftover. That was not supposed to be there. These go away. Go away. So I want to add that desktop picture thingy, desktop picture mobile config, to my manage installs. And we'll save. And we're done with that. So Monkey runs, on average, about once an hour. So let's just talk for a while, and maybe in the next hour or so, it'll do something interesting. Or I guess we could just kind of fake it and force it to run right now. So here I am, Joe user, just using my machine, so happy with my my custom background that I found on the internet and stole, but it makes me happy. What did I just do wrong? Manage software update. And but Monkey's running in the background, and it's doing what it was told to do, which was install that configuration profile. And it's going to do it in the background. It's not going to bother to tell me, so I'm just using my machine. And oh, what just happened there? Oh. Okay, well, some glitch. Okay, I'll just change the desktop background back to what I want it to be. I really like it. Wait, that's not working. Here, what? I got. Okay, there's Elsa from Frozen. Let's use that one. Nope. Yeah, I think we should. Yes, exactly. Well, I'm a little bit clever. Is there some other way I could set the desktop? Let's see, Firefox. I think, if I remember right, Firefox has a way. Did I actually, okay. Yes, okay, fine. Get connected. All right, I don't know, let's look for some cat pictures. Yahoo cats. Images. All right, there, here we go. Oh, I like that one. Okay. So if I write, look at that, set as desktop background. Haha, see, I've got around them. Yep, that's what I want. Stupid computer. All right. Oh, wait. I know. I heard about this configuration profile thing because I went to this talk at Penn State. So I wonder if our management people are doing that. Let's go profiles. Let's see. What's in here? Desktop picture. Your organization desktop picture settings. Library desktop pictures. Okay, that's got to be what this is. All right, well, I'll show them. I'm just going to delete this profile. Darn right I want to remove it. I don't have an admin username and password. Oh, wait, I do, because the guy that was helping me, I was watching as he was typing it. So let's see. I hope they didn't change the password recently, because it's the one I remember looking at. And it's gone. And still my desktop doesn't change back. Well, this actually is if I were to log out and log back in, my desktop would come back. But it actually turns out that I could just kill the dock, so we don't have to do the whole logout. But so my desktop picture that I had before comes back. But Monkey's still on this machine. Monkey's going to run in the next some amount of time, right? So I'm so happy I figured out how to undo the management there. Of course, since I have the admin password, I can probably do a lot more damage, but we'll see. But again, I'm pretty happy with what I've done here. And eventually your users are just going to give up, right? I mean, this thing just keeps resetting. So it's not perfect, but it is a way to, even if your users figure out some way to remove these configuration profiles, hopefully whatever your management software is, be it Monkey or anything else, they'll reinstall those configuration profiles to get the things set the way you want them. All right, back to... So, yes. So when working with configuration profiles, I have some recommendations. I think you saw from the various demos, you need to edit your profiles. The ones that Profile Manager makes contain lots of stuff that you may not be interested in. And I think that's true probably with any of the other GUI editors. I think the one that Casper includes, and that sort of thing. They're all designed around what Apple thinks are logical groupings of things to manage, but they may not really be the things you want to manage. So edit those profiles to contain only the stuff that you're interested in. If you used MCX in the past, it had a concept called compositing, and it did a really good job of taking settings that were in various MCX objects and compositing them together so that you had a kind of a cohesive whole. In fact, you could do things like, I have settings at the machine group level, settings at the machine level, settings at the user level, settings at the group level, and there was a precedence order so that the user level settings could override the machine level settings. Configuration profiles have none of those things. So you need to do all of that compositing, all of that figuring out sort of in advance, and make sure that only the settings that you want for a single preference domain are in a profile. Because if you install two profiles and they both manage the same preferences domain, what you get at the end is undefined, because it may depend on which order they were installed in, and if one gets removed and maybe the other one gets reinstalled, you're not going to get consistent results. So you want all of your settings for a given preferences domain in a single profile. Apple does not officially support using configuration profiles to do anything other than forced settings. However, with mcx to profile, you can actually make configuration profiles that do the old mcx once and often behavior. Those will sometimes work. You should test them, see if they work for you. There have been various versions of OS X that have had some unique behaviors with once and often profiles, and again, Apple doesn't officially support them, but there are many applications that don't work properly with forced settings that do work properly with often settings, for example, or once settings. So you may have to try those. The reason why you need to test these is because reality doesn't always match the documentation. I took that during a rainstorm, so I just thought it was very ironic that, driving down the freeway. The traffic was at a full stop when I took the picture. I was driving down the freeway, and I saw this sign, and I just thought it was very funny. So if what I've talked about today is interesting at all to you and you want more information, there are a couple sessions later this week that talk about it. Unfortunately, they're both at the same time. So pick one. Choose wisely. Apple has a lot of documentation about it. And This is one of the things I forgot to do before I came down here this morning, but this link will be live within half an hour. And this will be a link to all of the tools and documentation I've mentioned today. The slides will also be available later. So we have, it looks like about 15 minutes for questions. And obviously, if you're standing in the back and you're tired of standing and you want to leave now, feel free. But I'll be happy to take any questions. And the squawk box, or what is it called? The catch box is back there. So raise your hand and then duck, because you're probably going to have a thing thrown at your head.
Could you use Apple Configurator with some of these instead of Profile Manager?
Could you use Apple Configurator? Actually, when I first started working with configuration profiles, I was using both iPhone configuration utility, and I think I played around with Configurator. The problem with those two tools is they're focused on iOS, and so they will have none of the OS X specific settings in there. If it happens to be a setting that is supported on both iOS and OS X, yes, you could use those tools to make those configuration profiles. But anything that's specific to OS X, you can't do with those tools.
Hey, so I have a bunch of copiers that require a user login that would require user input to be able to, for basically the user to be able to print. I'm wondering, is there any way to use a configuration profile to prompt for user input?
To prompt for user input. Actually, there is. There's actually an example on my GitHub configuration profiles repo, which you'll have a link to, that there's a special payload called an identification or an identity payload, and that actually prompts for username, password, and some stuff like that, which then can be inserted into the next payload in the profile. I think it was originally designed for like email payloads and that sort of thing, so that the profile would prompt for the username and password and then configure the email. So I don't know if it's flexible enough to do what you need to do, but it's worth a shot. You can play with it.
Hey, Greg. So before a lot of people go crazy, there are some very basic things that you can't do with profiles, right? Like for example, set network time servers and stuff like that. Are you allowed a resource that will help people, not go off and try?
Well, no.
Okay.
If you want an idea what profiles can do, so you don't end up beating your head against the wall trying to do something it can't do, look at Profile Manager and see what are the categories of things that it says to manage. Those aren't all the things that it can do, but it's those things plus anything that uses standard OS X preferences in standard OS X preference locations. Network time is not one of those things, so it can't manage network time. So if you kind of understand it at that 10,000 foot view, then you realize which things that you can't do. You can't create a user account with a password. You can't update the password of a user account. So this is just one tool of many that you will have to know how to use as a OS X administrator. There is no one tool that's going to solve all of your problems. There's no screwdriver, hammer, circular saw tool. But wouldn't that be fun? Yes.
Hey, I just had a suggestion or helpful hint that I found. If the task of editing those big, huge XML files looks daunting to you, one thing that I found helpful is that just use the defaults command to write a preference to your desktop or a scratch directory. Say defaults write con.apple my Safari settings. It doesn't even have to be a real preference domain.
Yeah.
And if you know the values, just put the values in, and then you have a clean plist to start with, and then you run it through mcxTo profile or the profile package.
That's a great tip. That's really a great tip. Did everybody understand what that was? So use the defaults command to create basically a brand new preferences file with only the settings that you're interested in, and then import that. Then you don't have to spend a lot of time editing out the stuff that you don't want.
This is really cool, by the way. So I'm still using MCX. Am I headed for disaster? And why did you switch from MCX to profiles? What caused you to do that?
Apple stopped supporting it as of
like
10.7.
10.8 or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, or 10.8. So
It does
what,
still work.
what number are we on right now?
10.12.
Do you think it'll last forever?
I don't know. It's lasting so
Do you
far.
want to wait until Apple puts the gun to your head? I mean, how many warnings do you need?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, no. I mean, if it works for you, and you're willing to, and it's too much work to convert, and you're willing to take the risk, do that. But with tools like mcxTo to profile, it's pretty easy to convert from local MCX or from network MCX to profiles.
Do you even have any things that you can't do in profiles that you really wish you could do that were done in MCX?
There probably are some I can't, off the top of my head, I
it's
can't think
nothing
of any right
important.
now. But then we didn't manage tons and tons of stuff via local MCX either. I mean, and there was stuff that we stopped doing, like we were creating, we were managing home sync, you know, with local MCX. We don't do that anymore. We don't do any sort of home sync and that sort of thing. So we're actually managing less now than we did before. I think there was a question up here, so you really just chuck that thing. There we go. That's the idea.
So just for the benefit of those who might not be familiar with any of this, how would you go about finding those preferences on a computer for those third-party apps?
So how do you find preferences for third-party apps? Well, that's a topic on its own, and I suspect that that's going to be covered under managing user settings. But applications have bundle IDs, which you can find inside their info P list, and usually the preference domain matches that same bundle ID. So if I were to look inside the bundle for Text Wrangler, inside its info P list, I'd probably find that its bundle ID was com.barebones.textedit. So I know now that the preference domain is com.barebones.textedit.